Hey guys, it's Miss Langworth. We are going to continue the resistance today. This book is written by Jennifer Nielsen. It is a story as we follow our protagonist, Kaya, um, and all of the courageous things that she did during her time in the resistance. So, if you remember, guys, in chapter 2, we learned that first, the most awful part that we saw, we learned how the Germans came into Poland, how she lived before the German invasion. You know, her brother owned a store, and then after the Germans came in, if you remember, she saw her father in the square, and there was an officer that was just ripping parts of his beard. He was just like grabbing chunks and ripping them off of his dad's face, and his dad couldn't resist because if he'd said anything or resisted, he would have been killed. And if Kaya or her brother or her mother had tried to help them, they would have been killed as well. None of the Polish people, the people that he considered his friends, were willing to help because you could be killed for helping a Jewish person. So he just had to take. But she did point out that they took so much more than his beard, they also took his dignity. So um, that was when she was actually separated from her family at the end of the chapter. And so we are going to learn what happens next. Because if you remember at the end of the chapter, she said a few days later her third life began, though in a most unexpected way. And so she's lived three lives. She had her life before the German invasion, and then she had her life during the time of the German invasion before she was put out on her own on the streets, and her third life begins. So we're going to see what happens. Now remember, her dad told her to make it to her grandmother's and that she could stay with her grandmother. And she said she didn't know if she could get there. It was a really far distance. So we're going to start with chapter 3. And remember, each of the chapters are certain dates. And so this is not quite a year, but it is through the end of summer and through, the next year. So she goes from, it's a little over a year, sorry, that she does during this time. So from April 25th, 1941 to October 5th, 1942. And she's at the Kopaliny farm in Poland. And so let's go ahead and start and see what happens here. I didn't make it as far as my grandmother's. For the first 3 days after leaving Krakow, I wondered if I make anywhere at all. Papa had warned me to be careful about who I trusted, so I trusted no one. I stole eggs from untended chicken coops, hid whenever a car or wagon passed by, and slept in cold ditches at night, covered with reeds or grasses, wondering how long I could last this way. Not long. I'd known that since the moment I left Krakow. Then on the third day, I wandered past a sign for a village of Kopaliny, and a memory sparked within me. A farm there was run by a couple named Shimshon and Gusta Dregner, both in their early 20s. Before the war, they had been leaders of my Jewish scout group, Akiva, which taught us about our culture and history and who we might become one day. I'd lost track of them after the invasion. Though I'd heard Shimshon was arrested for a while for some of his anti Nazi writings. Late that night, I showed up at the Dragner's doorstep, tears already rolling down my cheeks. I hadn't seen them for 2 years. What if they didn't remember me? What if they did and couldn't take me? By the time Gusta answered the door, I was almost shaking with worry. She was a pretty woman with a serious nature and a warmth that immediately began to calm me. Kaya Lindner, she said, clearly surprised. I took a deep breath, hoping that I had to ask wasn't too much. I knew it was. The last thing anyone needed these days was another mouth to feed. Will, will you let me stay the night? I can leave by morning if. Oh, nonsense! Gusta wrapped an arm around my shoulder and led me inside. Of course you'll stay here for as long as you want. If there was a way to love her more in that moment, I didn't know it. I did stay, and it wasn't only me. One by one, that first summer, another Akiva scouts came from to the farm. All of us suddenly on our own, but slowly becoming family. We worked the farm during the day and gathered each evening to socialize and study. It was a good life until we thought of those we had left behind, of our true families, most of whom were now trapped inside the ghetto during what turned out to be a very cold winter. Now remember, most of the ghettos did not have plumbing, did not have electricity, did not have heat. The buildings were not even livable, guys, okay? And it turned out to be a very cold winter and they're trapped inside. Locked behind walls with too little food and too much disease. The problems worsened with every new wave of Jews brought in from other areas of Poland. Then selections were made and hundreds disappeared by train or were simply shot down in the street. So far, my family was not among them, but I saw other Akiva members crying and prayed that I would never have to fully understand how they felt. Most of the news about the ghettos came to us from another Akiva leader, a man a little older than the Dreichners, whom everyone called Dolk. I'd heard it was a fake name, but I never asked him about it. If he was hiding his true identity, there had to be a reason. Where both the Dreichners looked distinctly Jewish, Dolek had more Polish features. Thanks to the Shimshon's forgeries, he was able to travel nearly anywhere in the country and return as often as possible, telling us of a war that seemed to be spreading all over the world, of Jewish resistance groups forming up in Warsaw, or worst of all, what happened to those who were taken away by train. Which meant I was already anxious on the day he arrived from Krakow and motioned me over beside him on a bench at the back of the house. It was early in the summer of 1942, and I'd hoped the warmer weather would bring better days ahead. How wrong was I? Dolik had come from the Podgorsk ghetto. I'm going to pause this. I got to get my plug. Sorry. All right, guys, I had to go get a charger. My computer was about to go dead. But anyway, Dolik has come, and he came from the Podgorsk ghetto. And if you remember, that's where she left her family. And he wants to talk to her alone, which might not be the best of news. No, it couldn't be that. Surely there was another reason why his mouth looked grim, his eyes so heavy, why the tone of his voice was flat when he said, "I have some terrible news for you." My heart constricted enough that I could barely mumble, "Please don't say it." He paused too long, and if he was struggling to force the words out, then it was even harder to make myself sit here when what I really wanted was to run somewhere, anywhere, and to keep running until the war couldn't touch me anymore, where it couldn't hurt me or those I loved. But that was impossible. Finally, he said, "It's about your brother and sister. I'm so sorry." I stopped breathing, and the corners of my vision blurred. This wasn't happening, not this. He continued, "Sarah was taken away on the train to Belzec." Dolik's tone was gentle, but his words struck me like a blow to the chest. "I thought you should know." "What is Belzec, a labor camp?" At first he didn't answer. He only furrowed his brow, his somber expression full of compassion. "I've told you what I've seen there, Kaya. You already know what it is." A death camp. Sarah was barely 8 years old, and she knew nothing of war or violence. She'd fallen victim to a level of hatred she couldn't begin to comprehend. So her brother and sister that she left behind that were in the ghetto had been taken away, and her sister was sent to a death camp. Enormous tears spilled onto my cheeks, which I was certain would never dry, but he wasn't finished. I squeaked out, "My brother?" "The same night as your sister was taken, your brother failed to return home." Yitzhak was 12 at the time. He loved to build things with his hands, but my father had hoped Yitz would join him in the shoe repair business instead. Like my mother, he used to sing. He used to. Maybe he was still alive. Maybe not. We might never know for sure. On the day my little sister was sent to her death, I had been planting seeds in the ground, congratulating myself on having escaped the worst effects of the war. That evening when Yitz disappeared, I had been laughing with my friends here, planning the feast we might have when the harvest came in. I was utterly ashamed of myself and vowed in that very moment to find a way to remember them, to honor them, a way to bring some meaning to their loss if I could. I just didn't know how to do it. My answer came later that same night as we gathered around the supper table. Dolik reported on what he'd seen and heard around Poland, about the mass graves of Jews shot dead in the forest. Our people packed so tightly into trains that many never survived the trip to the so-called labor camps. And if they did survive, they were likely killed upon arrival anyway. "We know the truth," he said. "But most of the Jews do not. They refuse to believe it or can't comprehend such horrors." His eyes slicked to me. "Even when it touches their own lives." Then Dolik told the others about my family. There were tears and expressions of sympathy, but I was hardly the first to receive such news, only the latest in a long line of Akiva members who were mourning friends and family, still trapped in the ghettos. Or not in the ghettos, not any longer. Shimshon stood. "Our situation is becoming clear. It is time for Akiva to make a choice. Do we remain a scout group pretending the war isn't happening to us and never will? Or do we become something more? Let us decide our fate before it's decided for us." Standing beside him, Gusta said, "Let's be clear. Any decision we make will end with our deaths. If we do nothing, if we wait here, it's only a matter of time before the Germans come for us and put us on the same trains." Dolik leaned forward to add, "Or there is a second option. What if we die on our feet fighting back?" He grinned. "What if we prove to the Nazis, prove to the world that not all Jews will go like lambs to the slaughter?" Shimshon clapped his hand on his friend's shoulder. "We will join other resistance groups. We will disrupt the Germans when we can. Above all, in every way possible, we will try to save the lives of our people, if you all agree." As I lifted my eyes to him, I was flooded with competing emotions. Fear and doubt swirling with my sadness and guilt, blending strangely into something I could only describe as excitement. I didn't understand why I should feel such eager anticipation. None of us had military experience, or, for that matter, life experience. We had no money, no connections, and no training. Our Akiva leaders weren't pretending we had any chance to succeed. But if we did nothing, if we continued living behind the sheer veil of safety, then we would certainly fail. More important, I owed something to Yitzhak and Sarah and to my parents, who might eventually be forced into the death camps too. I wanted revenge for every single Jew who had already fallen, and a chance to save the life of every Jew still standing. I was one of the first to raise my hand and say, "I'm in." Other hands followed, both boys and girls, the youngest of us teens, and our leaders not much older. I didn't know how someone like me could possibly make a difference, but if this was my way to honor Yitzhak and Sarah, then I would do whatever my leaders asked of me. Their request came that same night after everyone else had left for bed. Gusta pulled me aside. "Have you heard of the couriers, Kaya?" And when I shrugged, she added, "The courier's primary job is to get in and out of the ghettos. To get in, you'll have to forget everything that makes you Jewish." She pursed her lips. "I've noticed your accent is less Jewish than the rest of ours." "We lived in a Polish district before," I said. "My parents sent me to the public schools with Poles." She smiled, obviously pleased. Were you often mistaken for being Polish? More than I was thought to be Jewish. In contrast to many Jews, my hair was blonde, my complexion a little lighter. I spoke Polish as fluently as I did Yiddish, the language of most Jews in Poland. And I even spoke a little German. So, guys, I want you to look at this sentence on page 23. If you look where my hand is, they do this a lot because I know that Polish people speak Polish. Okay, we can make that assumption because she says she speaks Polish and she went to school with the Polish and with the Poles. And Gusta's asking her if she was ever mistaken for being Polish. Now, here she said, I spoke Polish as fluently as I did Yiddish. So I know if she's speaking Polish and she speaks Yiddish, I know that's another language, but I don't know a language for whom. Like, I know that my Hispanic students probably speak Spanish, okay? But I don't know who this belongs to. But notice what they do. They do this a lot in sentences. Sometimes with words, they'll put a comma, and then they give us the definition or what it means, and then they start the rest of the sentence. So Yiddish is the language of most Jews in Poland. So this is the language that most Jewish people spoke in this area. And then she said she even spoke a little German. Okay, so that's just a technique that you guys can use when we're reading. All right, Gusta's face became grim when she said, I won't lie to you, Kaya. This is a very dangerous job. As a courier, you will smuggle in food or money or maybe forged identification papers or items of greater risk. At all times, you will have information about the resistance. If you are caught, you might be shot on sight. More likely, you will be tortured first. My eyes widened. Tortured? She didn't hesitate. The invaders will do whatever they can to extract the information they want. If they don't succeed with you, they will threaten your loved ones or fellow prisoners. They might kill them right in front of you, but under no circumstances can you ever tell them what you know. Not a word, Kaya, or everything we are doing here is lost. I couldn't pretend that her words didn't frighten me, and she saw my hesitation, quickly adding, Focus on the goals of the resistance. Remember why we are doing this. If you can focus, you will lose the fear. Lose the fear, and you will save lives. What about my friends? I asked. Jacob and Reuben. Boys cannot be couriers. With the circumcisions, it is too easy to identify them as Jewish. And only a few specific girls can do the job. Girls with your looks. Which meant my decision. Oh, girls with your courage. Girls like me with little to lose. Which meant my decision was made. I'll do it. My training began immediately. Within a month, I had completed my first successful mission inside the Lublin ghetto. The second month, I smuggled in my first weapon. By the third month, I was arranging safe houses for Jews in hiding. And now, it was October 1942, a month after my 16th birthday. And I had just made it inside the Tarnow ghetto to undertake my most dangerous smuggling operation yet. So, guys, she has just turned 16. Okay, so she has been dealing with this, for a while. But she has just turned 16, and she's fixing to do her most dangerous mission yet in the Tarnow ghetto. And we will pick that up with our next chapter.